What's up, homies? Logan Crowell here, founder of Helping Our Music Evolve, aka Home, Nashville's premier music hub. In this episode of the Homie Podcast, I sat down with Rob Abelow. He's a social media influencer and online thought leader behind Where Music's Going, which is a popular newsletter that analyzes the music industry and makes bold predictions about where it's all headed. Rob shares so many exciting and at times challenging insights about the state of music business and technology, but he positions it all in a way that will help artists leverage the trends and find long-term success in their careers. This episode will definitely make you think hard about where music's going. And if you enjoy the conversation, be sure to share it with a homie. Thanks. You're listening to Helping Our Music Industry Evolve, aka the Homie Podcast, where we bridge the gap between the traditional music industry and the new creator economy. I'm your host, Logan Crowell, serial entrepreneur and marketing nerd on a mission to empower music creators. Join me on this journey so that you don't get left behind in the new paradigm, and I'll show you why there's never been a better time to be in the music business. And now, let's dive in. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We have Rob Abelow here. Rob is the founder of Where Music's Going, a media and consulting company helping artists, music industry pros, and builders navigate music's future. This comes from strategic insights on new ways to think and new ways to do in order to build more sustainable artist businesses. He's formerly a longtime artist manager, indie label owner, and music tech founder, with focused experience in nurturing meaningful connections between artists and fans, and with billions of streams and top 40 album releases under his belt. Very cool, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Logan.
Yeah, absolutely. So this podcast is called Helping Our Music Industry Evolve, and that is the theme of the podcast. So I thought it was very fitting to bring you on since your whole brand is Where Music's Going. And I just found out about it like literally a couple months ago or something like that, and started looking at your content. And it's been really cool, man, to just watch your different breakdowns on the industry and how close of an eye you're keeping on the platform changes and things like that. But you were involved in another project. I don't know if we met before? Were you at the Project Music event that we did here in Nashville?
I came on after Project Music.
Okay. All right. Speaking of helping our music industry evolve, I would love to hear a little bit about Doper and the Secret Chord project that was going on, because that was the most impressive organization in the cohort that year, in my opinion. No offense to anybody else that was in that cohort. But it seemed like y'all were really ahead of the curve in a major way. And that if y'all would have had this AI wave that's happening right now, there's no telling how that could have unraveled.
Yeah, we were.
Any thoughts on that?
It was so cool to have AI in all of your materials, for sure. I was lucky to jump on the Secret Chord project. I think the more branded name out there was Doper, DOPR. It was two really just genius music neuroscientists who you met at Project Music, Dave and Scott, who originally founded really through their research and then founded the company based on their research. And it started from what is it in our brains, and then working backwards, what is it in music and patterns of sound that make us fall deeply in love with music and songs, and then working backwards towards artists. And they had done some great research showing that it was like these appropriate level of surprise within songs, and different by genre and how well you knew the artist beforehand, etc. And that when you listen to something the first time and it surprises you, if it's too surprising, you'll move away. Not surprising enough, it's boring, you won't be interested. But if it hits this right spot, you want to hear it again. And on repeated listens, you have this anticipation that's happening, coming into that moment of surprise, and it's really gratifying. And that also, that level of surprise is inflationary. So over the course of years, artists have had to be more boundary pushing in some ways. And just you format so many things. And what they were then doing, and when I came on, was reverse engineering that and actually looking at every different type of music from every different level of artist, how new, how established, and what are the appropriate levels of surprise in melody, in treble, in dynamics, et cetera, that's going to work and connect with different audiences. And how could we take those learnings and using machine learning and AI, work with artists as they're creating music to help guide them from batches of demos into the best ones to record, from all of your mixes. What are some of the best decisions to make? And it was really interesting stuff. We actually started applying it even in Web3 and looking at buying decisions people were making, very small subset to start. But on music NFTs, to say these are the kinds of artists people love. What are some other artists they would love based on these characteristics? Unfortunately, the project ended end of last year. Variety of reasons I can't get into, but associated with and very sad. But one of the founders, Scott, who you may know, actually passed away a few months. So unfortunately, the project came to an end, and I think some of the research will find its ways out through some other partnerships in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that was such a cool project. When I saw that on your background, I was like, okay, cool. He's really not just analyzing all of this. He's getting in the startup games and pushing some solutions forward too. So that's really cool. So let's fast forward to now. How long have you been doing the sort of creator model of your newsletter? Has some pretty great traction. It seems like you're crushing it on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter, right?
I refuse to call it X.
Yeah. Tell us about the pivot that you made into that space. I'm particularly interested because I'm starting to try to wrap my head around how to embrace that creator model and just how it's been going for you and maybe some of the twists and turns that have come along.
Would love to. It's so interesting to be on the other side of things. 'Cause I come from really like artist management is the core of my career and how I see the music industry. I like that because it's like a very holistic view. You have to know about really everything. You touch every aspect as a manager in some way, shape, or form. And you're also the closest to the artist, which is why I loved it. But then I became a label owner, mainly to help artists that couldn't get signed that I was managing. And for me, it's all an evolution of, I did it for a lot of years, and then I wanted to help more artists instead of one-to-one, how it could be one-to-many, and how it could have a bigger impact on the music industry. And I started that approach from the music tech angles, advising, consulting on different projects that I thought were going to be impactful and successful, but be in a way that I thought was pushing the right evolution of music, and I could have some small part. That was how I ended up joining Doper, was I was consulting there, that ended up joining.
Okay.
And in the process with Doper, as we were trying to put some of our thoughts out into the world, I started using Twitter, and I think was finding some success there because there's not a lot of people coming from deep within the trenches of the music industry, really working with artists as a manager or something, and call them BS on a lot of overly utopian, especially in the music NFT Web3 world. And so could have one foot in maybe some tech and not being a Luddite, but at the same time understanding the realities of how challenging the artist business is and how important the artist fan relationship is. And it's not just something to be exploited easily by somebody else. And so that was exciting to see traction happening there. And when Doper was winding down and I started doing more consulting and just started talking more on Twitter and a little bit on LinkedIn, it just became clear this was a great way for me to take that one-to-many approach. And it's talking to managers, talking to artists, talking to people building who are looking for this next wave of how things are going to happen. And what I call the new way of building, which I think is much more direct to fan and from the ground up. And so I launched the newsletter in March, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've seen all the challenges.
This March,
yeah.
Wow. And how many subscribers are you at so far?
A little over 7,000.
Hey,
I'm happy about it. And it's none of that's paid or anything like that. So we've got really high engagement. But like the best thing is just like, for one, the ROI on putting your thoughts and ideas out in the world is huge. The makeup of the newsletter is so great. And what I'm trying to do is speaking to an artist at like the earliest part of their journey, but also like the CEOs of some of the biggest, the most important companies in music, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to break big concepts down into easy chunks that make sense to everybody and kind of put in a direction. And like the community that's building around that has been very cool.
Nice. That's very cool. I feel like I'm my target audience, so to speak, is pretty much the same. Where I direct pretty much all of my thinking towards the creator themselves that's trying to put all the pieces together, that started with this, oh, wow, I'm really good at this and I really love doing this. How do I now turn it into a business? Like that's where, what would you say, 99%,
At least.
if not more, of the creators get stuck in that phase. So I also agree that it's important to not, because like in the marketing world, you always want to be talking to one
Yep.
person, right? It's one persona. You don't want to be talking to the creator and the
Yeah. And
CEO.
then nobody, that's super serving anybody.
Yeah, but it's so important to bring this way of thinking forward, and this sort of creator first, like this is what's going to happen. We can get on board with it and be a part of that value ecosystem, or we can face disruption essentially as people that aren't really creating enough value in this ecosystem to justify the revenue that they're pulling out of it, so to speak.
Speak to it so well. So part of the reason I realized, I'm like, wow, this validates so much of my thoughts, in that I think creator first, direct to fan, community led, all those types of things, which are common trends in what I talk about, is something. And the super fan, I always put it in quotes because I don't know, that's co opted and has a funny vibe to it. But the super fan opportunity that's out there, so to speak, the majors and major companies, they all understand that's been the ignored thing over the past bunch of years. And that is the direction of where things are going. And they don't know how to tackle it. And they don't know how they can have their part. And it's important to speak to that from the earliest artists and creators on, and to speak really to that type of person, or to the person who's building the tools for those people. And the
Mhm.
biggest companies out there know they need to understand this trend and what all the newest creators are going to be using.
Mhm.
But you're right, it's hard not to speak to one. I give this advice to people every single week. It's like literally write for one person, and then you'll find millions of people think it's fantastic.
Yep. So, speaking of the direct to fan relationship, in one of your latest newsletters, you said that there's no better marketing plan than having a direct relationship with your fans. And I like wholeheartedly agree with that statement. And I guess when it gets down into the tactical level of that, and you start to go, okay, cool, what does it mean to own fan data and to own that relationship, to pull it off some third party platform? And that the logical, or the most common way to do that is through email address, maybe a phone number. But I'm just curious because I've now worked with directly with hundreds of creators, and I've seen some that really do give it the college try to run a newsletter and tell everybody about their new releases and tell everybody where they're going to play shows and all of this. And I have yet to really see any artist, recording artist, launch a newsletter that I'm like, "Oh shit, I gotta open that." It's, "Oh, great, cool, they let me know the new release is out." And that's one touch for me to later on, when I'm engaging with my streaming platform or what have you, to hopefully they're top of mind. But what I see is that for newsletters, educational works, you know, so much better than basically any other sort of format that you can do there. So I'm just curious, how have you seen artists or other creators really own the fan relationship that's outside of the educational space and keep them super engaged with what they're doing.
You bring up something great about, I've actually been thinking quite a bit. I'm in the newsletter business now, right? It's
Mhm.
so how can an artist keep up that level of engagement when it all kind of centers on them and they're not providing a level of value that is different, educational or informational. And newsletters for artists, separate from what we call maybe like an email blast or like marketing email list, are rarer, and they tend to be, around like more established artists who are also fantastic writers. So like Jeff Tweedy from Wilco has one, and his is great. And he tends to have a demo in there and unreleased stuff. And Nico Case has one, and Kimbra has one. I've actually been making a list recently of a bunch of them. I'm happy to share with you after as
Yeah,
well.
please.
But I rarely see them as like an early kind of growth strategy. Although I do think like the right type of artist who understands that format and is a great writer and maybe takes it as a way of sharing things they're working on that's more owned can make that work, but it's separate from like their larger mailing marketing update list, because not every person is going to want to get your weekly newsletter. That's going to be too much for a lot of
Mhm.
people. I mean, using the Jeff Tweedy of Wilco example, Wilco has a separate email newsletter for them. I think in terms of owning the fan relationship, it did like the corollary to the title you quoted of the best marketing plan is owning the fan relationship is something I have always said is like, really at the end of the day, the best marketing is just get their email. And that can expand to text, and that can expand to like some kind of community chat. And it's just always doing that in every opportunity you can, because then when you do have something important to talk about with way higher certainty, know that you can reach that person and have a way higher percentage of them opening it and a much, much higher percentage of them converting. Even before social media pushed a lot harder to not have people go to outbound links and things like that, the conversion, people would always say, hey, we posted about our tours and all these things on Instagram, but I would see such low conversion to that going to people going to the ticketing sites and buying tickets compared to email, where when people
Mhm.
do that, we're converting far more purchases. So the idea there is just make sure whatever your focus is between those things, you're just constantly building it in this slow way. Email is the most reliable one that people have. They're going to continue using in a decade, and that they're okay with you reaching out to them on. SMS is following that. There's definitely like certain demos that are less okay with you reaching out. And then I think like the community chat or newsletter thing is an interesting one for people to play with. And what I look at is like, how can you on the inbound in the onboarding get people to do multi sign up for which of those things they're interested in? So like a really cool example, there's a company called Level who's that's a big part of what they're doing now. But if you go to Fred again and you go to sign up to his community or his email list, there's like a onboard page that has you also check in if you want to sign up to the other one. And then you're also getting some information. So you're getting what city is this person in?
Mhm.
Just a small example of like when you have that moment, get people in all these different owned areas and find out some information about them so that you can then in turn serve them information that's far more relevant. To
Yeah.
knowing somebody's city like is everything. You're going to sell so many more tour tickets if you can specifically have in the subject line what town and venue you're coming to. And to go further, so the example that that I had in that newsletter, I didn't say who the band was or who the manager was, and I was promoting a show. I was like 22, and it was like 1,000 cap room. It was a band called State Radio, and this was an offshoot of a popular indie band called Dispatch, who built everything through like
Yeah.
intentionally putting the music out through Napster, hand-to-hand combat, like having kids sell their CDs on consignment in schools in the Northeast. And State Radio, Dalton Sim was their manager. He now manages Father John Misty and Mitski and some others. Great manager, super smart guy. And I had said to him, I was like, we had whatever it was, like $1,500, $3,000 marketing budget. He just crossed it out and was like, we're just going to email the people in 50-mile radius. And it will sell out immediately. And in talking to him further, it's just we've put all of our energy into just pushing people onto these like sign up lists, showing like the intent they have, showing if they want to be part of the street team, putting their zip code. And I don't want to waste $1 of you trying Facebook ads. So anyway, without going deeper, that's the genesis of my awakening into how powerful that is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that data, it's one of those things where on the front end of starting a business, people are like, yeah, data is so valuable. You're like, what? I don't really get that. And then the deeper you get into it and you look at, okay, oh, wow, I'm doing business with all these different people. How do I make sure that I can do repeat business with them? And that's a huge part of it, is getting good at managing that data. Do you recommend that artists start using like a CRM and things like that and take it to that level? I do.
Yeah, I do. And ideally, I'm cautious of how sometimes when it feels like too much work or you're trying to do too many things, you end up
burning out.
And that's why sometimes I'm like, at least start with just email, and the data is just who they are and what city they're from. For me, I talk about intent a lot, and there's different ways of grabbing that information and putting that into your CRM, and that'll change like your targeting of emails and your sequence of emails. I really do think people should have CRM. You can now attach it to so much other behavior online.
I know.
There's some really cool like platforms coming out too that are helping to put it all in one place. And you can have people attach their Spotify or Apple and see so much different behavior. And that helps you really prioritize important fans and understand limited edition merch you should be making and all these different things that are really valuable. But something I come to in terms of you have a relationship with somebody, you want to keep it. You at a show opening, or they hear your song somewhere, or they catch you somewhere on social media, whatever that kind of first moment is. And perhaps they like love what they've heard. And this is one of my new favorite artists, or I want it to be. In the next hour, they are overwhelmed with thousands of other things in their world and life. And in the next month, how many hundreds of thousands of other things that they're going to forget you if you're not somewhat top of mind, especially if you're new. And so I think people often use that opportunity to say, hey, go back to Spotify and listen to the rest of my stuff. For me, it's if you can find a way for them to connect with you directly through email or community, you have that info. But if you can either in that process or after they sign up, have an email sequence, you don't want to go overboard. Like one email within the next 48 hours, maybe another one in the next month, that shows them an opportunity of like how to go deeper with you. So maybe like the best content that is a little bit more owned and more like you is in the context. So that maybe it's video or something else, or maybe a place to experience more with other fans. That's like chat or community, or tour dates or somewhere else to buy in. You're controlling and giving them options to come deeper into what you're doing.
Absolutely. And the only limit is your own creativity of how you reach out to these people and how you bring them deeper into your world. A good example that I saw recently was an artist, Vion Isaac, who's a friend of mine, and he's been leaning heavily into the advertising space for the past 5 years. And like as soon as he started making any money from his streaming, and he started his own little indie label and stuff, but just always reinvesting. Eventually he hit some real like compounding growth and traction. And he all of a sudden realized that wow, I've got a lot of fans now. He's got hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners, and he's putting up millions of streams a month. And but I don't know who they are. Basically, I don't have a way of getting a hold of them. And I'm now really getting to where I want to tour and play live. And so and this is a backwards way to do it, but at least he was able to do it. He started running campaigns to his fans to get them in different areas and saying, hey, if you want me to play in your area, sign up on this list. And he had just a simple form where it's like name, email address. I think he was getting phone number, and then he was getting their location. And he ended up with, I can't remember how many, between 5 and 10 cities with over 100 people on the list that were in that same area that wanted to see him play. And so I talked to him, and he was like, "Man, how do you think I should go about should I like be taking this data to an agent or something like that?" I was like, "It's not quite to that level yet." I was like, "What you want to do is reach out to those people directly and start asking them what's their favorite venue in town? Where do they like to go listen to music? Do they happen to know the person who books that room? How many people do they think they could bring out to the show if you were to come? Or alternatively, do they know anybody that would want to do a house concert because he's doing a little more stripped down kind of music anyway?" And so he started doing that, and it worked like a charm. And he just got done doing a tour all around the country and like selling some tickets, making money. And
I love
it was his first time ever out.
that we think of it, it removes the human, but it's the opposite of that if you do it well. And what you're speaking to is like the new way that I'm talking about. It's like build from the
Mhm.
ground up, direct fan engagement. And I say with startups, when you're first starting, do what doesn't scale. And that's how you
Mhm.
find your biggest supporters. You find out what really resonates with them, and you build and grow something to a certain point before you do all the scalable things, really. And really, artists should take that approach. And I love that, reaching out directly. And what you're doing is you're getting these people to get like really attached to what you're doing and that's a community and a movement that kind of wants to see you succeed. And they're going to be the most important people that help drive it early on. That's totally the way of thinking I love.
Exactly. Cool. One of your other articles or something you shared online said, there's never been a better time to be a creator. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Again, so much of the stuff that you're putting out, I'm like, man, he nailed it. So my thesis on all of this is that artists, if they think of themselves as really a subset of the creator economy, then and they understand that the trend for the platforms is to help them find people that want to engage with them. And also, there's now a trend with the platforms to help them monetize those people directly. And the fact that all the tools are actually getting easier to use to create online content. And now the tools to market yourself and create the ad copy using the chat GPT or whatever, like that's all getting easier and easier. And so that's my thinking behind it is this is the perfect setup for somebody that is highly creative and can make things that people want to see or interact with online to do that, and then essentially learn how to use whatever way makes the most sense for them to monetize that. Do you have any sort of is that where your head's at whenever you say it? Is that kind of the way you see the situation?
Somewhat. And I go, yes or no, it's the best time, right? And all those things you said are true that I think it's obviously easier than ever to begin creation, to distribute, to market. It's also the easier than ever for everyone else. So it does democratization to its fullest extent creates a lot of very tiny slices and a lot of slices of attention, slices of money. So that becomes the challenge, right? It's just how do you break through that noise and how do you grab enough attention and make sure when you do grab that attention, it's not just this very short thing, it's something that sustains. So I do think it's probably one of the best times. It almost looks at what kind of group you're looking at, but it's one of the best times for anybody to become a creator or a music creator. And that's why we have so many. But if you're like the top, however many, there's less protection for you than there used to be because now, there's not that moat of it's difficult to get
Mhm.
into this group. And that means it's anyone can move from like the long tail to like the top of music faster than ever with like less outside capital needed or gatekeeping needed or anything else. But also anybody who's in the top can move back to the bottom so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So it just presents different challenges and opportunities. And I think a lot of the last 5+ years has been in scaling. And the next 5+ years is going deeper. And you talked about it with monetization. I look at it with like artist to fan direct relationships being a bit more of a priority, either at platforms or with new kind of alternatives that are arising. But the biggest challenge I look at is that for music is we need like the total pie to be growing as fast as the number of creators. And I think we're going to start seeing that thing.
Yeah. How do you see that pie growing?
So the pie's mainly been growing from streaming and just more and more small subscriptions. So it's really the scale thing. There's diminishing returns on that. I think we're going to hit like well over 1 billion subscribers on Spotify in the next 5 years. My prediction is close to 1.5 billion. But more and more of that is going to be, quote, rest of the world, which means those people for at least for Western artists won't either be in areas you can tour to easily, but also have a much lower subscription rate. I think there's going to be a lot of,
and therefore have a lower payout.
That'll be combating with, I think the price of a standard subscription in the US will be $15 in about 5 years as well. And those things will compete with each other. I think where we're going to see like additional net increases are going to be in direct to artists, better monetization. I think there's going to be a lot of unbundling of what an artist does from mega platforms, bundle back into kind of like artist ran, whether not necessarily totally siloed like artist platforms like I have my own app, but more like Patreon style, community style places where it's artist is like the context and you bundle in your engagement and your content and your monetization there. I think that there's the potential for a lot of co-creation and interactivity for the right types of artists, sometimes using AI, often using AI, so that your music is actually like the seed that starts things. People are a lot more willing to spend more money if they're directly engaged in creating and giving feedback to something than if they're passively consuming. So those are a couple of the ways that I think it will hopefully grow, and also in ways that are like more directly attached to individual artists.
So I want to go a little bit deeper on the using AI to guide the creation process, if I understood that. And you're basically saying that the fan can essentially license a seed creation where it's like, hey, let's say a demo, for instance, and where the fan community can leverage tools to play around with different versions of that until you find something that hits. Is this what you're saying?
I'm checking. Okay, yeah, some announcement's going out in an hour, so I can't announce. I guess this isn't live, right? This is taped and it's coming out later.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give a couple examples because one is announcing at 9 a.m. Pacific, so in an hour and 20 minutes. So Audius, which is like a Web3 decentralized streaming platform, they have about 5 million current users, so it's still small in the grand scheme of things.
You said Audius is the name of it?
Audius. So they have the ability to release, so this doesn't even use AI at this point. They have the ability to release stems to people who are like following you, and they're now releasing a monetization strategy on there where you can put things behind gating where they can buy the track and support you, and maybe it comes with other things. And one of those things could be stems, and then there could be like remix contests and things like that based on it. And they've already done some there with like big DJs that have driven a lot without the monetization. And so you could have it where like submitting one and potentially it becomes like the version with another artist on it. So that's one little version of it. On the AI side, a really early experiment is something called Pixelinks and their product, which is called Chorus with a K. And blanking on the name of the DJ was the big part of it, with the ears and the Mickey Mouse hat. and
Oh,
that we all know.
um,
Dead Mouse.
Dead Mouse. Yeah, Dead Mouse.
So this is really interesting. They're taking like seeds from your catalog as an artist that you've licensed and voluntarily are putting out there. And other like DJs or people who are like interested in becoming a music creator can take those seeds and they can create their own versions of new songs. And it can be a mix of yours and another artist. And they can mix it
Mm,
together, and your new creation will have a blend of which artist it came from, which they understand. And if you monetize it in any way, I think you might have to monetize to be able to use it. You might not. But if you monetize it and sell it in any way that's authorized, a portion of the income goes back to those artists. And there's really like an infinite amount of ways that we're, scratching
wow.
the surface to deal with this. I look at TikTok, and they've launched TikTok music in 5 territories, and they've also just started to launch a bunch of AI creation tools. So if I'm living in TikTok music, somebody releases a song, it has the ability for me to play around with it in a really easy to use in-app co-creation place. And I make a version of it. Maybe there's even like a licensed voice from somebody I could throw on top. And I'm able to share this to my TikTok, and ad revenue goes back. And then there's some agreement where now I can release it somewhere. Like, to me, there's just so many things you can do there. And as a fan who starts participating, like we look at it in like the gaming world, where they've done so well by giving a lot of things away for free to play. But then the biggest participants, or whales, who get deeper and deeper in and get obsessed with it, will spend so much money continuing to create and build and get bigger skins. I think that potential is maybe there, so that somebody wants to create more and more versions, and they're getting rewarded in certain ways. And we'll see certain people who are essentially creator consumers spending, instead of a $9.99 per month streaming subscription, they're spending $2,500 a year, and they're getting more value out of it.
Hmm.
So that kind of is like where I think that has a lot of potential to mirror the gaming space.
So it's like the artist as the empowerment of new artistry model, so to speak, where the artist is the sort of core inspiration or core creator of it's almost similar to a splice type model where some of the people just go on there and they lay down a whole bunch of stuff, and although those people don't get compensated after the fact, right, that revenue doesn't follow them around or anything like that. But in a similar way, that opened up for, especially for instrumentalists and people that build tracks and do sound design, that opened up a massive new, or grew the pie in a massive way for those people. I could see that. I could definitely see that working.
So if you look at that and then just say, what's the total addressable market for people who are going to use those stems and rebuild with them? It's the professional artist, and then the next tier of learning to be professional artists.
Mm.
Now with AI tools, how many people in app can create something quickly for fun for themselves, and then maybe they want to do the next level up with it, release it, share it, whatever, that could potentially be monetized in some way. I think you're talking about going from a couple 100,000 at most to upwards of 1 billion plus people in the next 10 years. You look at that co-creation market,
Huge
yeah,
difference.
like a nice accessory to, oh wow, this is a legitimate additional market.
Hmm. And I guess a logical place to go from that line of thinking is the AR world, right? Do we see that's going to mature in the near future to the level that people could be like playing a private show for me on my desk right here if we wanted that to happen? And,
Maybe
you know,
it's harder for me to get my head wrapped sometimes. I'm more AR than VR for sure.
yeah.
There's definitely opportunities there. I'm less certain into how it plays out exactly. It seems like I'll talk more to the problem actually than to the specific solution there. Look at touring and merch, and maybe let's say vinyl are really great profit centers for artists once they hit a certain level. But that level is hard to get to. It requires
Yes, it is.
upfront cost, operating expenses.
Call it tour support.
Yeah, fixed expenses, et cetera. But those are the hallmarks of sustainable career, and you're getting to those things. And like, as we have a more fragmented marketplace and we have many more artists who are all succeeding, if those things aren't available to them, how can artists, this larger level of artists, find monetization? And some of this is what we're talking about. But I look at, what's the direct one-to-one for touring? Is it live streaming? I think that's probably a bit player, right? Is there something that can go beyond that so that we can essentially scale the live experience to more artists and more people? And once again, same thing. We have all these global listeners more than ever before. Really, that's the best thing streaming has done, by the way, is that people all around the world can listen to anybody and can pay in, where that was never happening. So how can you unlock that for these like bigger profit and bigger like fandom inducing things, live and like a physical copy? How do we have versions of that people actually find lots of value in? And that is where I think AR can play in, but I have less of a foresight to exactly how that looks, for sure.
Yeah, it's almost as if you could have an avatar that's pre-programmed to know that it's playing in Cleveland tonight or whatever, and it costs a fraction of the amount of money to have this AR stage or whatever set up. And then now they're doing the dome things in Las Vegas, and that's an extension of the live music model. I guess they're looking to create an entirely new live entertainment experience out of that. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out as well, along with all the push for Atmos and spatial audio and things like that. So cool. If the artist is a creator, we'll just go back to that idea for just a second. What do you think they could do right now? What do you think is like a way to piece together V1 kind of business model as a creator, speaking specifically to the artist?
It's always tough to say what the exact business model is. Like, something I say is fandom in each artist is really like a bespoke thing. So I try not to be too like overly prescriptive to what works for each artist. I think you have to understand what works for you and what are your kind of strengths in both where you want to work and participate and what's connecting with people, and to start there, right? And it starts like from the ground up with direct fan engagement, release in all the places, but then focus what your content, what your message speak to that one person, and go all in one area. So that might mean we're going to release our music everywhere, and I'm going to be on all the socials, maybe, but it's like this medium with, maybe it's not social, maybe it's something else, is going to be where I spend all my real energy in terms of creating additional content and building out my world and connecting with people and reaching out to them individually and trying to move them onto what is my primary artist ownership, right? If that's email or community. I look at a band like, there's a band called Goose, who's a jam band who's becoming like the new jam band behind like The Dead, Fish, etc. And their agent's a good friend of mine. He was agent for a couple of my bands, and we were talking about it recently. And what they did was like, they had been touring in small venues for a little bit of time. And what they really focused on was just like, obviously our live show is our strength. We're just going to put a like GoPro by the base of the stage with a good audio feed on every single show that we play. And we're just going to put the entire video up on YouTube. And we're just going to do that over and over again. And they did that for a while, and it was like 100 views, 250 views, 150 views. But then all of a sudden there was this festival they played, small festival, that like just went mini viral in a space and was just this next level up for them. And as they saw a lot more success from that, they went from 1 camera to 3 cameras and somebody walking around and doing other things. And they've gone all in on that. And obviously they're now playing 10,000 person or 5,000 person spaces. But I look at that as like a microcosm of just knowing what your strengths are and what works for you and going all in on that one.
Mm.
In terms of a business model, it's just, it really follows who you are as an artist and what your strengths are. And then understanding you can't do everything and you can't just follow the trend of what's working. It's what's going to work for you. And that might take some experimentation. Find what that thing is and put all your energy there instead of trying to do like a little bit of everything and a little bit of everywhere and following the trend. You'll never really understand what it is about you that resonates. And also I find that if you chase let's just do the go viral at these different places trend, even if something works, if you're not like building this foundation for it, it won't really have it won't be sticky. It'll feel like success for a moment, but it won't be something you can build on.
Man, that's good. It's so important to call out the strengths thing because the business models themselves should be built around your strengths, right? So it's tricky it's not a one size fits all question.
And I guess I'll add one other thing to that is that a lot of times, because I give a lot of just counterintuitive approaches that people think I may be like anti-streaming or something like that. And I'm like, no, not at all. Like that's just default, right? Like you need to be there, you need to do the things, the best practices. Just don't over optimize everything you do for playlisting or going viral on TikTok. It needs to come from a place of what you are and what your strengths are and what's authentic, so that if any of those things work, they're trickling back down to something that's going to have like sustainable value, and that you're collecting as many of those those like real relationships with those people into something that you have ownership of.
Yeah. No, that's really good. So you posted a couple of days ago about a bold prediction about the platforms moving towards pay to play model. I thought that was not only probably will prove to be a prescient sort of prediction, but it was also pretty, you could like ruffle some feathers a little bit by calling that out far in advance. But if you study platforms themselves and the nature of platforms and how platforms work and how they're set up, I believe that you're calling it right. It's the obvious direction for the platforms to go. But do you want to just break that down for the listener of your line of thinking there? Because it's something to watch for sure.
Yeah, and it's not something I want to see happen. And as if it does, this is just a possibility. But I think we're seeing a lot of signs of it, and the realities of how difficult of a business music streaming is craft this to be the result. I think we're going to see increasingly, we're going to have even more artists and creators who want to come into this space. And for a long time, that was like a positive thing for Spotify, was that there was anyone could release and it was easy to release, and it made them so central to the experience, not outside curators. Like you rely on the master of the attention to divide up for you what matters. And it actually takes power away from like any other one rights holder. But that's now gotten to such a high degree. There's a lot of pushback from major players on streamers to rein that in and make sure their market share doesn't go away. And so we've seen a lot of things happen. So we've seen the last few years, Spotify really pushing like a two-sided marketplace. And that's things like Marquee, which is advertising to people who've listened to you and people like them. Showcase, which is another version of that. Discovery Mode, which is to prioritize your songs in radio, algorithmic playlisting for a 30% reduction. And I'll tell you what, it
literally pay
to play. And post on that. It works. And it's irresistible. And this is what kind of changes. Eventually it becomes, again, the only way you can get through is if you pay for these things and if you reduce everybody's royalties. And then we just saw recently that first Deezer and then now Spotify are putting thresholds on minimums for songs or artists to have a certain amount of streams or followers to be part of the royalty pool. And I think this is all part of a greater trend towards, and listen, if you look at earnings reports from Spotify in their language, they talk about marketplace growing and that being an important part of their future. That's all that is. That's just selling
Mhm.
artists, labels, creators. I think that will be increasingly a thing. And it actually benefits major labels and major players, because if the only way to get attention is to have capital and influence, they're happy to
Mhm.
pay, because what that does is box everybody out who can't pay. Right, the last few
And it
years
gives them a
being
way to, like, razor sharp calculate their ROI too, right? If they know exactly what their payout rate is, and they can, at that point, predict down to the micro cent how much money they're gonna earn back from
and a lot of these
putting
are
a
real problems. Something I was struggling with as a label, and actually part of why I stopped actively doing it, was like, how do I drive value for new artists I sign? Because it's just like a total slot machine. Like, how do you
Mhm.
can't predict how you're going to make something work, especially like early on. And that is a problem. That's not a good thing either. There,
Hard business.
in this, and we've heard a lot in the last, especially last 6 months, of, hey, we're throwing up our hands. We don't know how to break artists. And it's that radio is expensive, hard to make happen, doesn't matter. Press, even if you get it, doesn't matter. It's all the things that matter.
Mm.
They're not really in anybody's control. And there's a lot of good to that, but it creates a lot of predictability. And it's definitely not good for big businesses who need to find a way to make these things work. It's going to become like more reliable that, hey, we know that if we spend X dollars on this project, there's a much better chance that we're going to have it kick into gear, because we can guarantee ear share on it. So
Mhm.
I think that's going to be more and more the direction. How draconian that gets and how much that becomes like we charge to actually. I was surprised. I think that the putting a stream threshold on being in the royalty pool is maybe what they feel like they're going to be allowed to do. I could see it being like, hey, you need to spend $1 a year to have your song available on the platform, and that goes back into the royalty pool type of thing.
Do you see that? Because I think that was part of your post too, was the storage fee for uploads. Do you see that as potentially cutting out the distributor? And why wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think just if Spotify really enforces their rule they're talking about here, it already is going to put distro kids and TuneCores in a pretty difficult position, because what they're saying is that if fraud is found from any of the songs you release, and that doesn't mean like the songs are fraud, it means like they're released and then there's fraudulent behavior, like getting them fake streams, they're going to fine those distributors or labels. No information on that. But if those fines are like big enough to change their business, how can you just be self-serve to anyone coming in and distributing music for this low price? So that's already a difficult thing. I don't know if there's going to be direct distribution, because Spotify tried that and gave up on that because there's a lot of pushback a few years back. So it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens. I think a lot of these, it's the trend of what happened at Facebook, what happened at Instagram, everywhere. Is you think this is your audience,
Mhm.
eventually you're just the customer now,
Yeah.
and you're the one you're like paying to reach your own people and others. And that's why I always look at social media now. It's advertising. It's not your own audience. You're always just re-advertising. And
Mhm.
I really see that's where streaming, that's what that'll become. It's just one more reason to lean into. It's just another top of funnel. Own these people when you can and if you can. And I think that'll help push a shift, at least for the more discerning fans, into, I want to experience more of like my music consumption in other places, because that experience is going to shift. It's like Facebook is still massive, but it's not like the young cool kids on Facebook, right? And I see like maybe that's a little bit of what happens. Is like it'll still be massive and growing, but like the more discerning music fan will probably at least spend less there as opposed to some other places. That's like the bold part of the prediction, because we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So much to unpack there. So it's just sticking with that train of logic for a second. And you've got a platform like TikTok that's not playing by any of those rules, right? It seems over the long run that you would just directly upload your music to the platform, and if because you're right, Spotify did try to do that, and they have to play nice with the established industry paradigm, whereas I don't think TikTok is necessarily in that. And so now there's going to be a competition that happens. And really, the job of the platform is what's called filter and match. And you probably are familiar with that term from your background in tech. But their job isn't to serve the creator. Their job is to filter out this massive amount of content and match it with the end user, and to do that as well as possible, and to keep the end user on their platform essentially. And if that's if that's what you're optimizing for, and I think the argument could be made that every platform has to optimize for that to keep their users on platform. This seems like a very interesting situation that could play out, to where you would have this huge amount of competition going on between, if, like, let's say people start streaming directly from TikTok, for instance, and they don't have to go to Spotify, and they see the artists that they love on TikTok, and they go, okay, let me just stream their music because that's where I'm at. What do you like? How do you see that? Do you see that just completely decimating the artist? Do you see it more kicking out some of the middlemen? Do you see I would think that it would go backwards to some of these like exclusive models where you can only stream me on this platform or whatever. I would think the platforms would try to push for that, just like they were doing with Joe Rogan, for instance.
They
So,
tried
any
to
thoughts?
podcast because they pretty much couldn't do it with music, and
Uh,
realized it was a bad strategy even there.
but it seems, if your prediction's right, that seems to be the
Yeah,
outcome,
I think we're
theoretically.
already starting to see some newer platforms take somewhat of that approach, but maybe it's more on it's an artist level. It's like giving you the ability to say everything exists in these other places, but for the full experience, you come
Yeah,
here, right?
subscribe
And there's
here.
also more. You can stream here, you can stream early, you can stream the whole thing, all the other versions. You can play with it, you can co-create, you can chat to. I think that is a lot of what may happen, and that's not mass consumption. That's not going to have the 1 billion users, but that's going to have the users that are going to. I look at it like this: super fans are 20% of the market, and it's a $4.2 billion opportunity. And Goldman Sachs says streaming can get that by doing XYZ. And what I say to that is, if they don't do something that actually is creating a real artist fan relationship, that missed opportunity isn't going to be extracted by Spotify or Apple Music. It's going to be by these other places that treat the artist fan relationship in the way that's different than mass consumption. It's different than lowest common denominator. I don't know if that's answering your question exactly, but the other thing about, I don't know if it's TikTok, but looking at, okay, if we're going to block off the super long tail of artists getting paid royalties, maybe it costs them more money to get in, and they feel like they can't penetrate. And there's so much creation happening there. And a lot more of these people are like like everyone on Instagram's a photographer. At some point,
Or a dancer.
is everybody a music creator with new tools? There needs to be an outlet for that. But maybe it's just bifurcated. I think it's really, we don't want to go too much, but I think it's really interesting because if you look at like video and you look at TV and film, you have purely premium subscription, gate kept platforms that we pay for, like Netflix and HBO, et cetera, that curate what's going to be on the platform. They have their deals with them and you pay, and there's algorithms there, but it's sorting with like their known and owned content. And then if you want to experience the like user generated content that lives in an entirely different sphere that is ad supported in YouTube or wherever else. But with music, that's been under the same roof. Not that there isn't YouTube or somewhere else, but like anyone can distribute to all the music streaming platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had, really, it's all a subscription model. Ad supported is nothing. And that's why I look at it as, okay, there's an opportunity here for the platforms to monetize those people. But as that number explodes, we really need other places for like user generated music to exist. It shouldn't all exist here. That should be experienced really in a different place where you have total, like way more control over it actually. And So I think we're going to see that bifurcation.
So these platforms are going to face this sort of fork in the road, if you will, of going, do we want to be that premium experience curated platform, or do we want to be the sea of user generated content? That's basically what you're saying.
Maybe. I think so. I don't know if I'll ever say that for
I think
out loud.
that's insightful for sure, man. This has been really fun chatting with you. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, own your audience. No, really appreciate you having me on. It was a great convo. Yeah, and if anybody wants to join up with what I'm talking about, it's free to join my newsletter that comes out about once every week, maybe every 2 weeks. I'm now
Yeah,
experiencing
plug it.
what it's like to be a creator.
What's the best way to follow you? Where do you prefer people to land?
You have to go to wheremusicsgoing.com and they can join there and find me on Twitter and LinkedIn from there if they prefer those.
Awesome. I highly recommend it. I'm following it myself, and I like your sort of edgy, kind of punchy writing style. And it seems like all of your newsletters are really, it seems like you go above and beyond to make sure there's a ton of value in each one. So appreciate that. Out here beating the drum, because there needs to be more of us in the space, I believe. And thanks for coming on the podcast and just sharing some really thoughtful stuff. So
thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great day, man. And hit me up if you're in Nashville.
I will.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to Helping Our Music Industry Evolve. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with a homie. And be sure to subscribe for new episodes at homie.show. If you want to develop a winning strategy for the modern music industry, then head over to homie.news and join my weekly newsletter. And if you're looking for a supportive community where you can get plugged in with top music industry creators and executives, become a home member at homeformusic.org. Until next time, peace, homie.